Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all very much for coming here this morning and giving me the opportunity to share my research and my thoughts with you. And I'm also very thankful to the Finnish Society for Media Education and the Finnish Society for Youth Research for inviting me here to discuss my ideas with you. So my presentation I'm calling Global Transformers or Captive Consumers, Addressing Complexities in Youth Media Participation. So let me give you a little bit of background before that I am involved in a project here with Professor Siruku, Dr. Irma, Dr. Anika, and Professor Sami, and it is a project sponsored by Academy of Finland. And we are collaboratively studying youth media participation in Finland, India, Egypt, and Argentina. So a lot of my thoughts today and ideas are based on this research project that we are doing together. And I'm very glad that Professor Sami is here, so he can add a few things. So basically, I feel that we are all storytellers, whether we are teachers or journalists or researchers. And the stories we tell about media and young people are very important because it affects a lot of things. And a lot of people hear these stories, listen to these stories, and decide what to fund, how to change curricula, how to control children's media, what to produce for media. And that's why I think that we should be really concerned about what kind of stories we tell about children and media. So I don't know how your observation goes for Finland, but like in India and the US, both places I've observed that there is a kind of extreme hype about young people and media. So on one side, there is this group which thinks that everything is going great and children are this autonomous, empowered, creative individuals, leaders and transformers, and we should leave them alone, and they know what they are doing with media. And on the other side, we have this group who is more into moral panics, and they think that this generation is all about materialism and selfishness, and they don't really engage civically or politically, and they are more like captive consumers rather than good citizens. So, and as adults, as teachers and policymakers, we are constantly veering between two extremes. So on one side, we are hopeful, we celebrate young people's engagement with media, and because my generation didn't grow with digital media, we also have a lot of admiration and envy for today's young people. But on the other side, we also have a sense of fear and doom, and we try to criticize them, and we also try to control their media use. So my argument is that reality is somewhere in between. It's not black and white. And I wouldn't like to call it gray, but I would rather call it multi-hued or multicolored. And it is as complex, as nuanced, and as multidimensional as reality anywhere else. And I would also quickly like to just go over the reasons that why there is this kind of hype about young people and media. And there are lots of reasons. Because, because of globalization, digital media are expanding everywhere in all different countries. And that's why these stories resonate with a lot of people and quickly become institutionalized. Also, we all, whether it's media like reporters or readers, we all love sensational headlines more than, complex articles. And so it appeals to us when you read a headlines, something, I've seen this kind of headlines in India, is that Facebook friend kidnaps the girl, and suddenly all the parents are, oh my God, should we allow the kids to go on Facebook or not? So this kind of headlines appeal to people more than, yeah, this happens, but only with this kind of people. If this happens, this is a little difficult to digest, Well, adultism could be another reason, is that because a lot of this discourse is generated by adults and not by young people themselves. So I remember that when my daughter, like she's 11, when she asked me what I was studying, and I said young people and media, and like she looked at me and she said that, can't you find something your age? So I don't think all young people are comfortable, us all the time studying them. And that's why, like, in the next project that we are all planning together, we are also thinking of like using more youth researchers than us all the time poking our noses. And then even if our stories are based on research, there are lots of problems in research designs, and that could also affect our stories. So today I'm going to talk more about like how researchers, because I'm basically a university teacher and a researcher, so how researchers can tell better stories about young people and media. So my first point is that it's very important that we refrain from making sweeping generalizations about that everything is either good or bad and not get judgmental. And the second thing is that we have to remember the context. The context in which we are talking is very important. And we should we should always remember that media are just one part of a child's overall life. The child's whole life is not about media. And that's why we have seen in our project that we have native researchers studying each country. So we know the countries well. We know how childhood has changed, how parenting has changed, how education has changed, how social changes are taking place in each country. And within that context, we are trying to see how young people engage with media. It is also equally important to study the connection between online and offline words. And Sophia and I were just talking about that because she's studying more offline words and I'm studying online words. And we found that there is a strong connection between them. So recently, I came across 3 important events, like Arab Spring, which we all are familiar with, and Professor Sami is going to talk more about it. We recently had strong protests in Wisconsin, and a lot of young people and students joined this protest when they thought that the government was favoring the top creamy layer at the expense of quality of life for the rest of the middle class and lower middle class people. And they were stopping people or getting together, unionize, and negotiate for their benefits. And in India, we have a strong movement right now going on against corruption. And there again, a lot of young people are joining. So in each of these 3 movements, young people are taking a lead and new media are heavily being used. But my argument is that each place's political economy, social structure, and culture, all 3 would eventually determine, what kind of use these young people will make of new media technologies. So as a researcher, as storytellers, it's very important for us that we go into these details. And it's important that we also ask that, okay, who is in the lead? Who is engaging? Who is not? Why? Why not? What is encouraging them? What is stopping them? So instead of just saying that, internet is bringing a revolution, I think it is important that we go into these details. Another area where context is very important is when we talk about digital divides. And many researchers have argued that rather than talking about digital divides, we should talk about digital inequalities, because it's not actually a divide, but it's a spectrum along which, these inequalities exist. And so when I did my research in India, one very important lesson that I learned was that we cannot mix up availability with access and use and participation. Because what I found that just because media are available does not mean that a young person would have access to it. Just because he or she would have access to it would not mean that he or she would use it. And just because we see them using media, it's not necessarily that they are participating. So it's very important that we see the subtle differences and study them, when is happening where. So I came across this very interesting case in India when I was doing in-depth interviews, and I found that there was this girl from a very poor slum background. But she was like her family and, her living conditions were so oppressive. And she had the strong motivation to get out of it. And luckily, there was a women's feminist organization in the community, and they were running computer classes for women. So this girl who had absolutely no resources, she peeled garlic the whole day to make a little money to be able to attend these computer classes. And she found here a very empowering network of other women in internet and computer, and had a very empowering attitude and use of new media. On the other hand, there was this girl from a very wealthy elite family whose family could afford anything. I mean, they had all the latest media. But it was a patriarchal family where they believed that women from their kind of families should not engage in those frivolous activities, and they should be doing more classy things, high culture things like classical dance, reading classics, painting. And so there was minimum media participation on this girl's side. So that is where I realized that, having resources does not mean that you would use them well. And there I would also like to quote the Nobel Prize winner economist, Professor Amartya Sen's argument, because he says that it is important to evaluate a life a person is actually living rather than just looking at the resources a young person has. So this is what we are trying to do in our project. The second important area for researchers, I feel, is questioning assumptions. Because we go by the stories we hear and we assume a lot of things. And one of the assumptions I often come across, especially in this celebratory kind of outlook, is that we believe that potential of new media would automatically translate into practice. And new media have a lot of potential. They can be more democratic. There is no gatekeeping, so it is easier for young people to publish their things, make global connections. But what we actually found, like when I was doing my fieldwork in India, what I actually found was that it's not necessarily automatically happening in real life. So I have 4 websites here. I have a blog by a young woman. I have Taking IT Global website. Here is a Barbie and Disney. And my study in India told me that most kids knew all these corporate websites. Even in India, they knew the Barbie website. They knew Disney. They knew Nickelodeon. They often visited websites. But there was not a single kid who knew about Taking It Global. Or I didn't come across a kid who was doing any political or civic engagement blog. So here I think is that our role is very important, role of media educators and adults to actually expose kids to all this potential which they haven't yet discovered. The second assumption that we often come across is that youth of Global South do not have any say in global agenda. And I'm glad to say that maybe there is some truth in this because youth from Global South have less access to new media and digital media, and there's lack of resources. But they are rapidly getting into global platforms. So if you look at numbers on websites like Taking It Global or Gyan, or if you look at youth groups leading their movements against climate change, you find a lot of people, young people from South. So Youth Ki Awaaz, for example, is a wholly youth-oriented portal run by youth themselves from India. And it's rapidly getting a lot of members. Also, I just came across several articles saying that Chinese young people are quickly taking up microblogging, and they're using it for opposing restrictions and bans and some of the oppressive treatment that they get. So that is another good thing. So here, one thing I would like to say that many researchers have observed that, use of new media can also make young people just, being into their ghettos, unless we lead them outside. Because though there is the scope of making global connections, most young people remain within their small, kind of familiar groups. Their Facebook friends are very similar to them. They are they're connecting more with the friends they already have than actually making any connections with people who are different. And that is one challenge that we as media educators face, that how do you take young people out of their very limited, restricted circles and, use the new media to help them make connections outside. Like, how do we get youth from Global South and Global North, like getting together, discussing global agenda, talking about issues. Another assumptions that my study helped me question was that we, again, automatically assume that higher youth media participation is something always good or something always desirable for young people. And I question this now because I met so many young people from small towns in Gujarat, India, where I was studying. I was conducting my in-depth interviews, and I found that though their media participation was low, they had a rich life outside media. So I have some photographs from there. Like, they hang around with their friends, they play, they eat out. They say that we have so many friends in neighborhood and, nearby. We really don't need to use new media to connect with the friends we already have. I mean, we are always together, and there are no strict bedtimes. The families are close neighbors, so they are into each other's homes and have really fun life. On the other side, not all new media platforms are youth-friendly. So youth can also get into new media and join fundamentalist sites or terrorist sites or, get into hate speech. So it's very important that we pay attention to what kind of new media participation young people have instead of, just saying that, oh, wow, they're participating, how nice. Also, I was recently attended a lecture by David Morley, and he said something very interesting. He said that you all the time say that new media are interactive and old media are not. So he said, so do you want to say that when I'm reading a book, I'm not interacting or I'm not engaging? And when a kid is pressing all these automatic buttons and shooting moving targets, that is interaction? And I think this is something we need to think about. That just because kids are pressing buttons and doing something with their hands, that does not necessarily mean interaction. And we also need to look at intellectual and emotional interaction they are having with media. Also, this brings me to the point of, again, to the role of adults in these things. Because when I looked at, kids in small towns of Gujarat, I realized that how much we have taken away from youth in metros and big cities. They don't have parks anymore. They don't have safe outdoor places anymore to hang out. And so then internet spaces become their only spaces to hang out with their friends and, have these conversations and comment on each other's profiles or experiment with their identity and profile. And then I recently came across a study which was studying young people's Facebook profiles to predict if they will get later into alcohol-related problems. And this really made me question that, do we really need this kind of research? Aren't we intruding too much in their lives? I mean, should we take away even this last space that they have, where they can be spontaneous and they can have, they can play with their identities and say what they want to say to their friends, without us watching over their shoulders all the time? So, I don't know. I mean, I think we should think more before we engage into this kind of research and, intrude too much in young people's lives. I also came across several articles and talks by professors recently who were advising young people to engage more strategically with new media. So they said, well, you talk about all these mundane things, but you should use social media more strategically because that can help you, more in your careers, in your life. And here I know that social media can be used very strategically, but I again question that shouldn't there be places for them where they can talk about mundane things? I think it's very important, that they have this kind of spaces. So I think let's, stop and maybe think a little bit before we decide what kind of research we want to do and what kind of media example we want to draw from. And there again, I think youth researchers are important, because I don't want that we reach at a point that we make young people so scared and uncomfortable of people always watching them, that then they want to fake identities. They never want to express their true opinions, because your opinion is out visible to everyone, and then maybe some harm can come to you, or people can use those things against it. So I think this is something we need to think about. I think that just, I don't know, but most of our young people we know have friend requests from their parents and teachers and aunts and uncles, and I think that's, if we draw a line there, that should be enough. Yeah, and finally, some problems of design and validity in our research, and especially with the kind of research that our group is engaged in, which is cross-cultural, and we have to work across different cultures. So one problem that we find today in research is that boundaries have blurred. So earlier it was very easy to ask a young person that, are you a consumer or a citizen? But are there really such clear-cut boundaries today? Like in our School of Journalism and Communication, we have professors and students working on places where consumers and citizenship roles come together. For example, say green consumption or fair trade buying. Here you are being a consumer, but you are also being a citizen. Similarly, boundaries between public and private have blurred. Right? Boundaries between young and old have blurred. So it's also boundaries between whether you are being a producer of media or consumer of media are being blurred, because there's more and more of what we call prosumption taking place. You are producer at the same time you are a consumer. So we have to find new questions for our research. We can't keep asking the same old questions, because things have changed. And there is also this whole issue of language and meaning, because when I was studying in India, I realized that though I'm very fluent in the Indian language in which I was working, I wasn't necessarily fluent in youth language. So they had a different language to convey different things, different meanings. And so if we really don't understand the nuances of their language, it's quite likely that we misinterpret them. So also in India, I realized that when you ask people about globalization, it's very important that you actually figure out that what is the meaning they attach to globalization. There are people who think that globalization is westernization. It is a Western hegemony, trying to put their supremacy on everybody else. And then they would have a very negative connotation attached to this word. For some people, you ask them that, are you global in your outlook? They might just take it as I'm trying to ask that, are you Western in your outlook? So we have to really make sure and see that what kind of meanings people attach to words. And I also realized that it's very important to ask culturally sensitive questions. So just to give you one example, in surveys and interviews, we had a question asking young people that, are you a member of a civic engagement organization? If you ask this question to a young person, you're very likely to come across the answer, no, I'm not a member of any civic engagement organization. But when I dug deeper, and because I grew up there, I know that there is a youth organization in almost every community, every village. But this organization would be there for maybe last 30 years. Members keep changing. There is no name, no constitution, no mission statement, no vision statement. Today, the whole group would be playing cricket, but tomorrow, when there is flood, they would change their role, get into fundraising, help the community in flood relief. And tomorrow, if a hospital approaches them, they would be happily organizing a blood donation camp in their community. And then, again, next day, if there is a festival, then they would go around, again, raise some money and celebrate the festival. So it's a very flexible kind of an organization, but it does do many civic engagement activities, and a lot of political parties even use them for political canvassing and, voting. So unless you really know the culture in the country, you might end up making very simplified kind of statements. Okay. Okay, so now I come to another problem, and that is about, because we often use statistics when we talk about kids and media, and the kind of games that statistics can play with your research, especially, a country like India. Because India is such a complex country, and two things add to this. It's huge population, and there are strong structural inequalities. So we always say that, it's a cliche, but it's a very important cliche that if one thing is true about India, the exact opposite will also always be true. So you will find young people who are quite at par with the most elite people in America or Europe. They have that media access, they are media savvy, they are exposed globally. At the same time, you'll find young people who have never seen a computer in their life. And these two things coexist in India. You have girls who are at par with boys in education, income, the treatment they get. And there are so many girls, who are really oppressed just because they are girls. And again, these two things coexist in the country. So, in a country like India, if we say that, only 1% of Indians do it, it could very well be more than, the whole population of Finland. So when you go by number, you get a different story. When you go by percentage, you get a different story. When you go by rank, you get a different story. So that's why I have this example here that in international reports, you'll find that India is ranked 4th in number of television receivers. And you would think that that's great, India is doing very well. When you look at the percentages of the households with television sets, its rank slide down to 98th, because it's only 32% of the households, right? And the same applies to personal computers, mobile phones, and other media. So India is now positioned as the next big market for cell phones. And it's very true. It has great potential for cell phone development, and cell phones are being put into practice for many innovative things and good things. And right now, even if the number is huge, it's only 30% of Indians who own a cell phone. And if you look like here, like just the red and the gray marks, and you can see the urban-rural difference in cell phone ownership, right? And the same is the case with China, Indonesia, or Brazil, because these are all going to show a very high growth in cell phone markets. And so lots of multinational companies are interested in these countries, in developing things for them. But my argument is that it's very easy to forget the poorer sections of these societies, because even if you take, the top 30%, who can afford this thing, you're going to have enough people for your business. So it's quite likely that we will not pay attention to the other 60% who are not going to afford these things, and we might not do anything for them. We might not develop infrastructure and kind of structural equalities and opportunities that this other 60% would need to afford a cell phone. And that's why I feel that policy members have to pay more attention to these percentages than just going by numbers and saying that, so many people have cell phones now. They do, that's the truth. But also so many people don't have cell phones, and that is an equally important number. Another very interesting cultural thing I can tell about India is that probably in Finland, if you look at the number of cell phones, you can sort of gauge the number of cell phone owners, right? They are the same, or number of cell phone users. But in India, you cannot find out the number of cell phone users based on the number of cell phone owners, because in many middle class and low income kind of communities, cell phone is still a shared commodity. So the father might have a cell phone, and 6 other people in the family would take turns using the cell phone. Or in a village, one person has a cell phone and maybe like 10 neighbors, when they need, would use the same cell phone. So one cell phone equals many users. And unless you know these things about a country, you would get a very wrong picture if you just only go by statistics and say that only so many people own a cell phone, but so many more use it. Yeah. And finally, I want to make a point about our data analysis. Because I have more and more, I'm leaning towards what we call intersectional analysis. And this was actually started by Black African-American scholars in America. And what they tried to say, like they argued that when you talk about Black, you always had men in mind in America. And when you talked about women, you always had white women in mind. The Black women had no place. And they said that because they were Black and they were women, they sort of faced double oppression, which wasn't really like being brought out anywhere. So, and similarly, if I say that I'm studying how much like girls engage with new media in India, I would get very different results for urban elite girls and, rural underprivileged girl. So what we try to do is that we pay attention that our identities are not separate. So I'm neither Indian nor just woman, but I'm an Indian woman. And I would be treated differently if I'm treated as an Indian. I would be treated differently if I'm treated as a woman. But I would be treated maybe in a third way if I'm treated as an Indian woman. So this is what now we are trying to bring out in our analysis. Also, this helps us bring out certain things. Like in my earlier observations, we found that it looks like class does not have, any impact on computer use, because even children from slums, like very poor children, many of them said that their families owned a computer. So I asked my RAs to dig deeper and find out if this was really true. And what they found was very interesting, that it was true. They had a computer at home, but they had sacrificed a lot of other necessities and luxuries in order to get that computer. Because to them, computer was something that would take their child upwards, would someday help the child get better education, then a better job, and that might, be a vehicle for upward mobility for the entire family. So entire family made this decision that we would sacrifice on other things, but have a computer at home, which is very different for a family where buying a computer is absolutely not a problem. So based on all these things, I still feel that, for research to be successful, we have to look at all these complex factors. But for young people and media education still stays a very important sector. And basically, in countries like India, we have to see that, of course, the new digital media are very important, and we have to change media education to bring in the new media. But we also found that a lot of young Indian children still watch a lot of television, and many of them read newspapers. So many children told me that they regularly read newspapers. And when Sami and Irma and Siriku analyzed the media diaries they had from Indian kids, they found such a high interest in social and political issues through newspaper reading. So this is something, again, that we cannot ignore if we want to design a relevant media education program in India. So what I feel finally is that this is a field, where new things are going to come up every other day, like mashups, fan subbing. I mean, every day something new comes up, and it's so difficult to, keep a pace. But that is personally, that is why this field is so fascinating for me, because you're always chasing, you never have this feeling that, oh, we're done, we have achieved everything that we needed to. And so if you enjoy the thrill of a chase, I think this is the right field that we have all chosen, and will continue to be, doing new work because of new challenges that come up almost every day. So my final call is for a research which does not intrude in young people's lives, but rather improve their media experience, both as a producer and as consumer. So, well, this is what I wanted to say today about what kind of stories we tell about media. And I have many, many people to thank. So I again would like to mention the Finnish Media Education Society and the Finnish Society for Youth Research. And I would specifically mention Maya and Rona, the two most efficient young women I have ever met. They've really been doing a great job. Professor Suruku, Irma, Anika, and Professor Sami, my colleagues on the Youth Media Project. I have 3 RAs, Nidhi, Asita, and Gopal, and Khyati, 4 of them in India who are doing great work collecting data, transcribing, translating things. So I would like to thank them. My department in University of Wisconsin-Madison and my advisor, Professor Louis Friedland, have been very supportive of this entire project. And finally, the photographs you saw on my PowerPoint, where most of them, the photographs from India, were original photographs by Alok Brahmbhatt, who was my past student and now is a professional photographer. And so I would especially like to thank him for letting me use all his photographs for this PowerPoint. So I have his website here, and he has many more photographs on India on this. So thank you very much, all of you again. And I don't know, Reena, do we have time for questions?
Yes.
Sir? Okay.